All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're doing something a little different. We're running a forensic biological audit on one of the most persistent and disturbing legends in military history. And forget the simple story of a teleporting ship, we're going deeper, analyzing the event as a catastrophic failure of both physics and human flesh.
This right here, this single, terrifying image is the key to the whole thing. What the source material we're looking at suggests is that beyond all the myths of a ghost ship lies a much darker story, one literally written in the atoms of the men who were on board.
So, let's back up. What was this experiment even supposed to be about? Well, the official goal was actually pretty straightforward, born out of the sheer desperation of World War II. This wasn't some sci-fi teleportation project. Not at first. They were after the ultimate military advantage: total radar invisibility. I mean, the science they were playing with was absolutely wild for the 1940s. They were trying to weaponize Einstein's unified field theory. The idea was to generate an electromagnetic field so incredibly powerful that it could literally bend the fabric of reality around the ship, basically turning it into a ghost that enemy radar could never see.
So, according to the eyewitness accounts, on one single day in October of 1943, something went horribly wrong. The project didn't just bend a few radar waves, it apparently ripped a hole clean through space-time. The USS Eldridge supposedly vanished from Philadelphia, blinked into existence for a moment down in Norfolk, Virginia, and then snapped right back.
So, a ship blinks out of existence. But here's where we pivot from the popular myth to the real core of our audit. You see, the sources we're looking at argue that the real story isn't about where the ship went. It's about the horrific fate of the poor souls who are trapped inside it.
The true horror of this event was biological. This wasn't just a physics experiment gone wrong, it was a biological crime scene. It wasn't a failure of teleportation, but a catastrophic failure of re-materialization. Think of it like this: the system crashed while trying to put the crew back together.
Okay, so how does something like this even happen? Well, the science behind this horror has a name: decoherence. Now, in simple terms, the energy field was so powerful, it temporarily unzipped the very atomic structure of the ship and its crew. It just dissolved the boundary that keeps our physical bodies in a stable, solid form.
And here is the absolute crux of the horror. When the system tried to put everything back together, to rematerialize, the process glitched. It failed. The atoms of the crew and the atoms of the ship's steel hull tried to reform in the exact same physical space, at the exact same time. And the result was an unimaginable, horrifying fusion of man and machine.
So why? Why did this happen to the crew? To really understand that, we've got to look at the hardware they were using, and more importantly, the parts of that hardware that they completely and fatally ignored.
The designers of this experiment, they made a catastrophic mistake. As you can see, they saw the target as a disposable steel warship. But the victims, they were what the source calls the divine hardware. The designers viewed the crew as little more than biological cargo, completely failing to account for the fact that the human body is an incredibly sensitive electromagnetic system all on its own.
And that right there, that quote, it just nails the fatal flaw in their thinking. There was zero shielding for the men. They weren't just passengers on the ship. They were an active, unshielded biological part of the circuit. When the machine decohered, so did they.
And you have to understand, the damage wasn't just physical. This raw, uncontrolled energy field did something far worse. According to the source, it attacked the very anchor of consciousness itself, violently severing the link between the mind and the body. The source material actually uses some pretty ancient Gnostic terms to describe what happened. It talks about the ba, think of it as the mobile consciousness, the soul, being ripped away from its physical anchor, the ka, or the body. And when that connection was violently severed, it led to 3 distinct and frankly equally horrifying outcomes for the crew.
So, first, you have the physical fusion we've been talking about, this nightmarish blending of flesh and steel. Second, for the ones who are lucky enough to have their bodies reassembled properly, well, many of them had their minds completely shattered by the sheer shock of being taken apart and put back together again. And third, and maybe weirdest of all, this bizarre quantum instability they nicknamed the freeze, where survivors would just spontaneously phase in and out of our reality.
Okay, so this is an incredible, horrifying story. But it's all officially denied. So how do you prove any of it? The source argues that a crime of this magnitude, even when the government says it never happened,
can't be completely erased. It leaves a statistical ghost in the official records.
Well, the answer is, you treat it like a crime scene. You perform a forensic audit on the human cost. You take the official personnel files and you compare the crew of the USS Eldridge to guys on similar ships who weren't part of this experiment.
And when you do that, the numbers that come back, they're absolutely chilling. Look at the rate of psychiatric transfers for the Eldridge crew compared to a control group of sister ships. And remember, this was a ship that barely saw any real combat. There's no conventional reason for these numbers.
I mean, look at that number, a 770% spike. This isn't just a small anomaly. The source calls this a statistical scream. It's the data screaming that these men went through something so far beyond the normal horrors of war, it's not even on the same chart. But it gets even weirder when you dig into what those psychiatric files actually say. You have doctors in the 1940s just struggling to find the words for what they were seeing. They had to pull out this incredibly rare diagnosis, temporal dissociation. They were basically writing down that these men's minds had become unstuck from time itself.
And this is where we get to the final and most damning conclusion from the source material. Because from the cold, hard perspective of military science, the experiment wasn't a failure at all. In a twisted way, it was a profound success. The survivors weren't just casualties to be hidden away. They were the first data points for a whole new kind of weapon, one that targeted human consciousness.
Which leaves us with a truly chilling final thought. What if this catastrophe wasn't just a failure? What if it was also a proof of concept? The question the source leaves us with is this: if the Philadelphia experiment was the accidental discovery of how to break a soul, what happens when they start doing it on purpose? And that, it argues, is the road that leads directly from this ship to the horrors of Project MKUltra.